Now, still with us in Lyon is peace and security analyst Abdulkader Abderrahman, and Nabila Ramdani joins us from London. She's a French-Algerian journalist and a commentator specializing in French politics and the Arab world. And in Paris, Emmanuel Dupuy, he's the president of the Institute for European Perspective and Security. Thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Nabila, I'd like to start with you. Why is the violence getting worse and worse?
Well, a lot of the instability in the Sahel region can in fact be traced back to the disastrous Libya intervention led by the French in 2011. Colonel Gaddafi was killed, his regime collapsed, but all that led to a power vacuum which has been exploited by extremist groups. And Libya is now full of groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and so are the deserts surrounding it. And before the intervention, countries like Britain and France were negotiating extremely well with Colonel Gaddafi, bringing about a period of détente which could have very easily democratized Libya. But the violent Western intervention not only worsened the civil war in Libya, but it also emboldened groups such as Al-Qaeda, and we've seen the consequences following the intervention in neighboring countries like Algeria, with the attack on In Amenas, for example, the gas facility, which led to groups such as Al-Qaeda killing foreign hostages. So it just shows how vulnerable this area has become, and the French are desperately seeking support from allies, including from the European Union. But I think what we have to bear in mind when we discuss security issues in the Sahel region is how the global context has changed. Rather than dwelling on the complicated specifics of the French military operation that spans many countries, I think we need to appreciate that the way combat has changed all over the world. Many wars are not fought country against country as they used to be, but against terrorist movements operating all over the world. And we used to hear a lot about, the so-called war on terror. And by definition, that expression has all kinds of hawkish connotations. And but what France's problem is now is to reconcile, all the negative connotations associated with the war on terror with the real danger of allowing vast terrorist movements strengthening at Europe's doorstep.
Emmanuel, I want to ask you, would you agree with what Nabila is saying?
Well, not precisely. First of all, because the terrorist organization have been acting before the collapse of Muammar Gaddafi. The attacks occurred in the northern part of Africa in the beginning of the years 2000, 2001. There was the attacks in Mauritania in 2009 against the French embassy. So the question is not totally linked to the collapse of the state in Libya. Of course, arms and terrorist groups have been benefiting from and have been fueled by a certain number of capacity that they have relied on. But of course, the question is not about considering all of these terrorist groups as only linked to jihadi causes. There is a mixed groups in which the insurgency is focused on a certain number of quests for independence. This is the case for the Tuareg. They've been fighting for independence since 1963, so it's an old problem that the Malian authorities have been dealing with. Of course, there's a problem of narco-trafficking. All of these groups have a lot of finance, and this financing and allowing them to have a lot of weapons come from the drug smuggling and smuggling, of course, of human persons as well. 50 million euros have been benefiting from that, and we do still have hostages in that area. France still has an hostage. It used to have more than 7 hostages. So I will not totally define the problem of the insurgency linked to the collapse of the states in Libya. Nevertheless, the problem is about the inaccuracy of these states not only the G5 countries, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Niger, who have gathered in Pau, but it's a problem of governance, fight against corruption, a problem of asymmetry between the center and periphery, and this is not only the problem of Sahel, it's a problem of all of the West African countries.
Okay, my question to you, Abdelkader, is this the time for France to go, for their troops to leave, because they were brought in to bring peace to the region, and that isn't happening?
It is indeed time for France to leave, but as we saw yesterday with the announcement of the sending of 220 more men to Mali, there's a clear indication that France is not about to leave anytime soon. Beyond that, and moreover, France cannot leave at this moment after having created such a chaos in the whole Mali and in the whole Sahel region. I do agree with Emmanuel and Nabila. Problems of Mali and the Sahel dates back decades ago, but indeed those problems have been triggered by the NATO's intervention in Libya in 2011. Having said that, I do believe, and I'm deeply convinced, that what's happening in Mali and in Sahel is more than what we're talking about: terrorism, the fight against terrorism, drug trafficking, poverty, and everything. We have, first of all, to clearly define what we mean by Sahel, because generally speaking, we think of Sahel as the G5 Sahel countries, but the Sahel stretches from Senegal to Djibouti, and this is what we have to look at. And I do believe that there is a strategy, there is a geo-strategy being put in place where France is deeply interested, and that stretches from Senegal to Djibouti.
Nabila,
we can link Mali to Libya and to Chad and to Djibouti.
Nabila, question to you. Do you think French troops should go or stay?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the kind of insurgents groups we're talking about are not, small groups of radicals. They are heavily armed and extremely dangerous fanatics. And the most recent attempt by the French to take action against these groups was not taken by a right-wing hawk, but by François Hollande, who was a very conciliatory socialist, since he knew that if he ignored such threats by groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS in Africa, it could lead to horror, not just against Africans who live in that part of the world, but also threaten European lives. And yes, of course, France was a colonial power, but it's now a well-equipped and modern military, and its interests and actions are in fact supported and welcomed by the countries threatened by the insurgents. And there is, in fact, France has a legal mandate to justify its presence. And I would contend that the reason why the French troops are becoming so unpopular, it's not just because they're there, but because they are losing the war. With if I may make that point quickly, with 4,500 French troops and more than 500 armed vehicles, you would think that the French would have wiped out the insurgency. But they're in fact
Nabila, I just have to cut you off. We have 30 seconds to go. Emmanuel, a question for you, the final one. Do you think France needs more help in this region, outside help, a more global support? You have about 20 seconds to answer.
Well, of course, and of course we need help on two bases. First of all, operational basis, and this is why we have called for the new coalition and a new task force linking the special forces, and this is why we are making this call towards our European friends. And of course, when it comes to dealing with terrorism, it's not only a military or cynical approach which is needed, it's a global approach, and this is why the presence of the United Nations
We'll have to
Secretary
leave it
General
there,
Antonio
Emmanuel.
Guterres in Pau was important.
To all our guests, thank you so much for joining us, and great to have you on the show.